Her day had been going just fine. A little boring. Maybe just another routine maintenance job in the shipyard of New Terra Station. Fix this warp drive. Tighten that manifold. Ignore the broken cryo chambers because nobody really uses those anyway. But when an unauthorized repair order came through for a ship docked at the restricted bays, Kira Thompson found herself face to face, or rather, face to tentacle, with a problem she wasn't remotely qualified to handle. The ship was huge, sleek, and pulsing faintly with an otherworldly glow. It looked alive, like it was breathing. Kira grumbled as she hauled her toolbox up the gangway. Fix the warp drive, they said. Easy job, they said. She rolled her eyes and muttered under her breath. Yeah, because nothing bad ever happens on a mysterious, glowing alien ship. As soon as she stepped on board, she knew this was no ordinary vessel. The walls were smooth and organic, faintly pulsing with bioluminescent veins. She touched one tentatively, only to yank her hand back as it quivered under her fingers. Okay, she whispered. Not creepy at all. She made her way to the engine room, where the warp drive hummed ominously. Smoke billowed from a control panel, and sparks flew like the ship was protesting her very presence. Typical. She grabbed her hydrospanner and got to work, mumbling to herself about hazard pay and questionable life choices. That's when she felt it, something soft and slick brushing against her leg. Hey! She yelped. Spinning around, she expected to find a loose cable or some malfunctioning hose. What she didn't expect was a tall, imposing alien with shimmering blue skin, glowing eyes, and right, tentacles. Lots of them. They coiled and uncoiled as he stared at her, arms crossed like she was the one trespassing on his ship. What are you doing to my vessel? His voice was deep, resonant, and annoyingly attractive. Kira blinked, her brain struggling to catch up. Fixing it? She said, her voice more of a squeak than she'd intended. Who are you? I'm Captain Zareth of the Velician Fleet, he said, his tentacles moving with unsettling grace. And you are an intruder. Oh, come on. Kira shot back, finally regaining some of her composure. If anyone's intruding, it's your warp drive on my free time. Besides, your ship requested repairs. Zareth's glowing eyes narrowed. My ship does not request anything. It is alive, and it communicates only with me. Cool. Well, your alive ship is on fire, Kira snapped, gesturing to the sparking warp drive. So maybe it could have mentioned that before I got electrocuted. Before Zareth could respond, the ship lurched violently. Kira lost her balance, and the next thing she knew, she was tangled in a very compromising position, arms pinned, legs tangled with the captain's tentacles as they both hit the floor. Let go of me, she hissed. Her face flushed as she struggled against his grip. I'm not holding you, Zareth growled. The ship is. Sure enough, the pulsing veins along the walls seemed to have extended toward them, wrapping around her limbs like vines. Kira froze, her heart pounding. Is this some weird alien ship thing? Or are you just happy to see me? The corner of Zareth's mouth twitched, but he didn't answer. Instead, he moved one of his tentacles toward the nearest glowing panel. With a quick motion, he tapped a series of glyphs, and the ship released its hold on her. She scrambled to her feet, brushing herself off. Okay. First of all, your ship is rude. Second, if you're done trying to strangle me, can I fix your warp drive now? Or do you need to consult your space finds first? Zareth tilted his head, studying her like she was some strange creature he couldn't quite figure out. You're bold for a human. Yeah. Well, you're slimy for an alien, she shot back. Let's call it even. For a moment, she thought he might be offended, but instead, he let out a low, rumbling laugh. Very well, mechanic. Fix the drive, and perhaps I'll consider letting you leave my ship alive. Gee, thanks, Kira muttered, rolling her eyes as she turned back to the sparking panel. She could feel his eyes and tentacles on her as she worked, and despite herself, her cheeks flushed. The next time the ship jolted, sending her tumbling backward, it was Zareth who caught her. His tentacles steadied her, their touch surprisingly gentle. For a moment, they locked eyes, the air between them charged with something she didn't quite understand but couldn't ignore. "Careful," he said, his voice softer this time. "My ship has a temper." Kira swallowed hard, trying to ignore the way her heart skipped a beat. "Yeah. Well, so do I," as they worked together to repair the warp drive. The tension between them shifted. What started as antagonism softened into something else. Something neither of them could quite name, but both felt nonetheless. By the time the repairs were complete, Kira found herself standing closer to Zareth than necessary, her gaze lingering on his glowing eyes. "Well," she said, forcing a smirk. "Your ship's fixed. I guess that means you owe me." Zareth tilted his head, a faint smile playing at the edges of his mouth. "Perhaps, though I'm not sure what kind of payment you expect." "Oh, I'll think of something," Kira replied, her tone light but her cheeks flushed. As she gathered her tools and prepared to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that her encounter with Zareth and his ship was far from over. Kira stormed down the ship's winding corridors, her toolkit slung over her shoulder. Every step echoed in the organic, slightly squishy passageways, making it impossible to feel like she was doing anything other than walking through the inside of a giant beast. She tried not to think about it. The ship was alive. Cool. Fine. Definitely not creepy. Behind her, Captain Zareth followed with his usual unreadable expression, his tentacles occasionally brushing the walls as though communicating with the ship. She hadn't decided yet if it was charming or infuriating. "I don't need an escort," Kira muttered, not bothering to look back. "I've been fixing things on my own since before you decided to kidnap me." "I didn't kidnap you," Zareth said, his tone calm and maddeningly superior. "My ship brought you aboard. Without my consent, I might add. Right, because that makes it better." She rounded a corner, only to find herself staring at another hallway that looked exactly like the last three. She stopped and turned, narrowing her eyes at him. "Am I lost? Or is your ship just messing with me?" Zareth's lips quirked into a faint smile. "It is. Curious about you." "Great. So, it's alive, moody, and nosy. Your ship's a real catch." He ignored her jab and gestured ahead with a fluid motion of one of his tentacles. "This way. The central control node is near the engine room. That's where the warp drive communicates with the ship's nervous system." Kira blinked. "The ship's nervous system? You could have led with that." They walked in silence for a moment, and for the first time, Kira allowed herself to study him. He was tall, built like some kind of alien demigod, with glowing patterns etched across his skin like tattoos. The tentacles moved gracefully, as though they had a mind of their own. But it was his eyes that got to her, bright and intense, like they could see through every wall she'd ever built. It was annoying, really annoying. "You're staring," he said without turning. Kira scowled and quickened her pace. "I'm just wondering how you fit all those tentacles in a captain's chair without getting tangled." "Carefully," he replied, and was that a hint of a laugh in his voice? They reached a large, circular chamber at the end of the corridor. The walls glowed faintly, their surface shifting with alien glyphs that pulsed in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. At the center of the room was a raised platform, a series of crystalline panels flickering with what Kira could only assume was the alien equivalent of a dashboard. "This is it," Zareth said, stepping onto the platform. His tentacles moved over the controls, and the glyphs shifted in response. "The ship's control node. If you're going to fix the warp drive, you'll need to reconfigure its connection to the ship's core." "Okay," Kira said, dropping her toolkit and pulling out a diagnostic device. "Just point me to the part that's broken." Zareth's gaze lingered on her for a moment, and she felt an unexplainable heat rise in her cheeks. "It's not as simple as identifying a part," he said. "The ship responds to intention as much as it does to commands. You'll need to work with it, not against it." "Work with it?" she echoed, her brow furrowing. "What does that even mean?" He gestured toward the central console. "Place your hands here and focus. The ship will sense your intent." Kira raised an eyebrow. "Let me get this straight. Your ship is sentient, temperamental, and now it's psychic? You wanted to fix the warp drive," Zareth said with a shrug. "This is the only way," muttering something unflattering under her breath. Kira stepped onto the platform. She hesitated, glancing at Zareth. "If this thing zaps me, I'm suing you. He gave her a faint smirk. Duly noted. Kira placed her hands on the console, and immediately, the room seemed to come alive. The glyphs brightened, and a strange warmth spread through her fingers, up her arms, and into her chest. She gasped as images flooded her mind. Not clear pictures, but sensations. The hum of the warp drive, the pulse of the ship's energy, the deep, resonant thrum of something far older and larger than herself. What is this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. The ship is communicating with you, Zareth said, his voice softer now. It's showing you what it needs. Kira's heart raced as the sensations shifted. She felt the ship's pain, its malfunctioning drive, its damaged systems. But beneath that, she felt something else. Curiosity. And affection? It was faint but unmistakable, like the ship had taken a liking to her. Well, that's not weird at all, she muttered, pulling her hands back. The glyphs dimmed, and the warmth faded. Zareth watched her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. You're attuned to it, he said. That's unexpected. Kira snorted, brushing the hair from her face. Great. Your ship has a crush on me. That's just what I needed today. Zareth's lips twitched, and she could swear he was suppressing a laugh. I wouldn't put it that way. Yeah. Well, you're not the one it's flirting with, she shot back, grabbing her tools. Now, let's fix this thing before it starts serenading me. As she worked, Zareth remained close, his presence both comforting and infuriating. She tried to ignore the way his tentacles moved so gracefully, or how his eyes followed her every motion, but it wasn't easy. And when he leaned over to point out a specific control, his proximity sent an unwelcome thrill through her. Focus. Kira, she told herself firmly. He's an alien captain with a temperamental murder ship. Not your type. But as the hours passed, she couldn't help but wonder if maybe, just maybe, she was lying to herself. The warp drive was running smoother now, at least. That's what Kira told herself as she crouched under another set of glowing control panels, her diagnostic tools scattered around her. The ship hummed faintly in the background, like a giant, sentient cat purring in approval. It was weird, but at least it wasn't trying to strangle her with vines again. She'd call that progress. Above her, Zareth leaned against the wall, his tentacles coiling idly as he watched her work. It wasn't exactly helpful, but it wasn't distracting either. Okay. It was a little distracting. She glared at him from under the panel. Do you always hover over people when they're trying to fix your mess? She asked, adjusting a sparking circuit. Or is this special treatment? Zareth raised an eyebrow, his glowing eyes amused. My ship doesn't allow strangers to touch its systems. Consider yourself exceptional. Kira rolled her eyes and returned to the wiring. Oh, yeah, super flattered. Tell your ship I'd rather not be exceptional if it means risking electrocution every 5 seconds. Zareth didn't respond immediately, and when she glanced up again, she found him studying her. Not in the usual, dismissive way he had when they first met. No, this was different, quieter, softer, like he was trying to figure her out. What? She asked, her voice sharper than she intended. You're different, he said, tilting his head slightly. Most humans I've encountered are cautious, fearful. You're bold, reckless, even. Kira snorted. Reckless? Bold? Nah, I'm just stubborn, and maybe a little annoyed that your ship almost got me killed. He smirked, and the corners of his eyes crinkled in a way that was, frankly, unfair. And yet, you stayed. Yeah. Well, she muttered, turning back to the wiring. Someone's got to keep your floating death trap from imploding. Zareth stepped closer, his movements as smooth and deliberate as always. His voice dropped to a quieter tone, almost a murmur. You could have walked away when you had the chance, but you didn't. Kira froze, the circuit half connected in her hand. She could feel his presence behind her, the faint warmth radiating from him despite the ship's cold, metallic interior. Her chest tightened, and she forced a laugh, trying to shake the moment. Yeah, sure, she said, plugging the circuit back in, because getting stranded on a malfunctioning alien spaceship sounded like a great career move. I think it's more than that, Zareth said, his tone unreadable. You're curious. About me. About the ship. About why it called you. That made her pause. She turned to face him, her brow furrowing. Wait, what do you mean? It called me. I thought this was just a weird mechanical glitch. It's not a glitch, he said, his glowing eyes meeting hers. The ship's alive. Yes, but it's not random. It sensed you. It chose you. And it's never done that before. Kira blinked, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to process what he was saying. You're telling me your ship has some kind of crush on me? Zareth chuckled, the sound low and warm. Not quite. It recognizes something in you. A connection. Her brain screamed at her to shut this conversation down before it got any weirder. But there was something about the way he said it. Something that made her heart skip a beat. Okay. Well, she said, stepping out from under the panel. If your ship thinks I'm its new best friend, great, but I still need to fix this drive before it decides to connect me to the airlock. Zareth didn't move as she brushed past him, but his gaze lingered, and she could feel it like a weight on her back. She tried to ignore the way her skin prickled, the way her chest felt tight, the way her mind kept replaying his words. The moment was interrupted by a low, resonant hum that echoed through the ship. It wasn't the usual hum of the systems, it was deeper, more insistent, and it made the walls around them shiver. What was that? Kira asked, turning to Zareth. His expression darkened, and his tentacles tensed. The ship is warning us. Something's approaching. Something? She repeated, her stomach sinking. Like what? Zareth moved to the nearest control panel, his tentacles gliding over the glyphs. The ship responded instantly, displaying a holographic map of the surrounding area. A large, red shape pulsed on the screen, steadily moving toward them. Pirates, Zareth said grimly. They've been tracking us. Pirates? As in actual space pirates? Kira threw her hands up. Fantastic. Just when I thought this day couldn't get worse. They're after the ship, Zareth said, his voice tight. Its technology is beyond anything they've encountered. If they get their hands on it, it'll mean chaos across the galaxy. Kira stared at the map, her chest tightening. So what do we do? Zareth turned to her, his eyes glowing with determination. We fight, she laughed nervously. Great plan. Just one problem, I'm a mechanic, not a soldier. I don't even know how to work your ships. Tentacle gun things. Zareth stepped closer, his tone soft but commanding. You don't need to fight. Just keep the warp drive running. If we can jump to hyperspace, we can lose them. Kira nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. Okay. Got it. Fix the drive. Don't die. Zareth gave her a rare, almost imperceptible smile. Exactly. As he moved toward the cockpit, Kira turned back to the warp drive, her heart pounding. She might not be a soldier, but she wasn't about to let pirates blow her up or worse. And if Zareth trusted her to save his ship, well, maybe she could trust herself, too.